your period is your report card. It's going to be offering you clues about what's happening. So when you're interpreting your clues, which you might need your doctor's help to do, you always coming back to the kind of one of the questions is, okay, well, am I ovulating or not? Because that's fundamental. And then if you're not, then you want to fix that. If you are ovulating but still having symptoms, then you need to look at some of the other issues. You don't usually get premenstrual symptoms unless you did ovulate. So the true anovulatory cycles are pretty flat. Usually, like, women can have mood symptoms, but there won't be a clear cyclic pattern with them. But the most classic premenstrual symptoms are when it's riding that progesterone down at the end of the cycle. Like, because progesterone feels so good. So then when it starts to drop away, or especially if it starts to drop away too early, then you start to get withdrawal from it, basically like an anxiety that comes from losing all that nice GABA, natural Valium that progesterone is.
Welcome to The Body Never Lies. I'm your host, Leela Lutz. Each week, myself and experts from around the world help you uncover the secret ways your body communicates with you to empower you in your own individual health journey. Now, I've been teaching women and my male students that a woman's period is a report card for her health for many years. And when you really get in tune with a woman's cycle and understand her changes in hormones, you can actually train in specific parts of the cycle and get more strength gains, more lean body mass gains than if you just train her the same all month around. So I'm really excited today. Well, you can imagine my excitement. I found Lara Briden, who actually is an expert in all the things female cycle and how to be a detective in your own health journey. Lara Briden is a naturopathic doctor and the period revolutionary, leading the change for better periods. Informed by a strong science background and more than 20 years with patients, Lara is a passionate communicator about women's health and alternatives to hormonal birth control. Her book, The Period Repair Manual, is a manifesto of natural treatment for better hormones and better periods and provides practical solutions using nutrition, supplements, and natural hormones. Now, I love this book. I recommend it to all of my clients because it gives you an understanding of what a cycle is. And I also recommend it to all of my male students who are training women so they can understand their female clients better and program design to achieve their goals. So I really hope you enjoy this episode with Lara Briden when we talk about how to use your period as a report card for your health. I'm very excited today, everybody, because for about 15 years, I've been teaching women about ovulation and making sure that all my female clients ovulate. So I was very, very excited when I found Lara Briden and her book, The Period Repair Manual, which I'm holding here, because it explains ovulation and everything about your cycle and using your cycle as a report card. Thank you so much, Lara, for coming on to the show. I'm so excited.
Nice to meet you.
Your work is probably like one of the fundamental reasons why I called the podcast The Body Never Lies.
Yeah.
So
the body tells a story. Tells us what it means. Yeah.
So maybe we could start with talking about, we have things in health that are common and things that are normal. So maybe we could talk about a normal process of female hormones from puberty through to menopause. I mean, I think people are really, really misguided on what a cycle is. A lot of women come to me and go, I have a period every month on the same day. I'm great. But it's not the case. So I'd love you to explain.
Sure. Okay. Well, the focus is, as you've already stated, ovulation, or what are called ovulatory cycles. So real natural menstrual cycles where ovulation is the main event is very important for not only fertility, but for women's health in general, because it's how we make estrogen and progesterone that we need for bones, for healthy cardiovascular system, for brain. And so the overall lifespan, which I'm actually just about to share something on Instagram tomorrow, so you can have a look at that, about a lifespan of ovarian hormones. But so of course we start out as teenagers not ovulating yet. We start to make lots of estrogen, but don't ovulate yet, don't make a lot of progesterone, which is why teenagers can have sometimes irregular, but often heavy periods in those first few years, just until they're the communication between their brain and their ovaries matures, and then they start to ovulate, and that's when their real cycles kick in. Hopefully they haven't been put on the pill at that point, because that would just shut it all down. But if they get their real cycles going, then you've got the next 3.5 decades of maybe having some pregnancies, maybe not, but having these regular monthly doses of estrogen, especially progesterone. And then that takes us until our mid-40s, at which time it's second puberty, and we go through the same process but in reverse. So we stop ovulating as often. That's normal with perimenopause, but we're still making tons of estrogen, actually, which makes for a quite tricky combination of symptoms that can occur in our late 40s for some women. And then, of course, around 50, 51, on average, it all stops. And then we're in menopause, which will be there for the next almost 3 decades, probably, or more. And that's a phase of just lower levels of estrogen and progesterone. And we'll do a lot better in that phase if we've had under our belt 3 to 4 decades of ovulatory cycling to build up what's called metabolic reserve. So healthy bones, healthy muscles that we built from all those years of cycling, and that should help to maintain our health. Even in menopause, even if we decide not to take hormone therapy in menopause, which is another, obviously, a whole other topic. We can
do another one on that.
Yeah.
I actually have a lot of listeners who ask me, please do something on menopause, because it's really uncovered.
Well, my next book is coming on menopause, perimenopause and menopause. Yeah. So that's out early next year. That's written, actually. It exists. It's just being edited, and it's...
Okay, cool. Yeah. Well, that's definitely going to be our second interview.
Yeah.
But I think it's, I wanted to start with cycles, like a normal fertile cycle, because there are people in menopause who are not understanding as well. Like I'm just saying to you before this interview, I've got a new client who's got terrible bone mineral density, and when we go through her case history, I think it's quite possible that she never really had ovulatory cycles.
Yeah. So, of course, by the time you get to menopause, it's too late to do that. But when you're in your 40s, there's still time. That's why actually one of the chapters in my book about perimenopause, menopause is about, I called it cycle while you can. Like, do this while you still can. Try to get some ovulations under your belt.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this is so important too, because people still associate ovulation with pregnancy.
Yeah.
And wanting to be pregnant, wanting to be fertile, whereas ovulation is how you make your hormones. So every woman listening to this, whether you want to have babies or not, whether you're done with babies, whether you don't know what you're doing about babies, just ovulate.
Yeah, absolutely. So
just ovulate.
it's important. Like the analogy I use, if men had to ovulate to make their testosterone, they would never stop talking about it. It's very essential.
True. It's so true. And it's different for men, right? Because men make their hormones every day. Like with a man, we can say, do you wake up with an erection in the morning? That's a really good sign of testosterone. But it happens every day. Whereas women, we have this whole month.
Yeah.
So let's talk about a cycle where you ovulate and what it looks like and how you know that you've ovulated.
Okay. Right. Well, I'll jump straight to that and then we'll go through the cycle. But the best way to confirm that you've ovulated, to track cycles, is to track temperatures. I think it's the simplest. It's yeah, exactly. So with ovulation, which occurs 2 weeks before our period, temperature goes up by about 0.2 to 0.3 degrees Celsius. So it's not a lot. So you need a proper thermometer that has a couple decimal points on it so you can gauge that. It's a resting body temperature. So it's first thing in the morning before you move any muscles. That's the main criteria. And it's under the tongue usually. And you plot that. And then you can see if and when ovulation occurred. And just understanding it's also possible to have an anovulatory cycle where you do get a bleed, but there was no ovulation leading up to that. So that is a problem because, well, for one thing, you're not making progesterone, which means you could have weird bleeding, but also just in terms of general health, it's not ideal to have years and years of anovulatory cycles, although it's totally fine to have the occasional cycle where you don't ovulate. That's pretty normal. So a classic cycle, the timing of the cycle is all about the timing of ovulation. So when we're younger, like teenagers, it takes quite a while to build to ovulation. So they tend to have longer cycles, which is normal. So they might have up to 3 or even 4 weeks in the pre-ovulatory phase, then ovulate, then it's always almost exactly 2 weeks after ovulation. So in that case, like for a teenager, a 5 or 6 week cycle is normal. For an older, like older than 25, say, 30-ish something year old woman, a healthy cycle should probably be at least every 35 days in total. So that would allow up to 3 weeks before ovulation and 2 weeks after. And it's also, it's okay to have a slightly shorter cycle, 21 days, which would be maybe a week to ovulation, and 2 weeks after is always the 2 weeks after ovulation. So anywhere between 21 to 35 days, counting from day one of the proper bleed to day one of the proper bleed is a cycle. That's how you count your cycles. And I say proper bleed because it's not unusual to get a bit of spotting before the first day of the flow. And so you don't want to count that because you're still in your luteal phase with that. So you want to start counting from day one of the heaviest flow, I guess, the proper flow. And
so do all women get, you would expect a mucus change as well with your temperature?
So before temperature, it's not unusual to see what's called fertile mucus, which a different sort of vaginal fluid or discharge that looks like raw egg white. It's very slippery. It's in its fullest, kind of highest estrogen type of fertile mucus. It looks and feels like raw egg white, almost like jelly-like and quite slippery, but it can be more just liquid. But just keep in mind, it's not a guarantee of ovulation. That's just a sign of estrogen. So if everything's working, you get your estrogen surge, then you ovulate, then the mucus dries up. But with conditions where you're not ovulating regularly, you could just see quite a few days spread erratically throughout the cycle of fertile mucus, and that's not ovulation.
That's really key. I've had that experience before, and people tell me it's really important to see, does the mucus dry up though?
Yeah,
it's not constant the whole cycle. Yeah. So you sort of have a few dry days, a few wet days. If there's a real flow with that, isn't there?
The dry days come with progesterone, usually with the rise in temperature. That should dry up the fertile mucus. So that's part of what we're talking about now, is all part of what's called fertility awareness method of tracking cycles, which you can do either just to have that information about your body or to achieve pregnancy or to avoid pregnancy.
And I think too, when I started tracking my cycle in my 20s, I did it for a couple of years, and then I got really comfortable with it and knew all the signs, and I didn't have to track anymore. And then luckily for me too, when I wanted to get pregnant, it was very easy to get pregnant because I knew
exactly when you're fertile.
And so my body has a lot of signs when I'm ovulating a lot.
Good.
So and that, well, for me, I think I used that for about 10 years as a natural contraception as well. Great. So
awesome.
It's very liberating. It's very empowering, I feel, to have that that power with your body, to know your body that well. And I think it's also really a good form of connection with your partner as well, that they know too, and we're doing this together. It's not my responsibility, it's our responsibility together.
Absolutely.
And you get feedback from your male partner, he knows where you are in your he knows where I'm at. So it's really good. Can we talk about progesterone and why it's so important and what it does? A bit more specifically.
So it's the ugly stepsister of hormones. Everyone talks about estrogen, but progesterone is, one of its jobs is to hold a pregnancy. So it definitely is involved in pregnancy. But outside of that, beyond that, it's good for bone health. It's progesterone regulates immune function, so it can help to prevent autoimmune disease, which is actually quite important. It's also just really good for the brain. The brain loves progesterone, and progesterone stimulates the beneficial growth of new brain cells. So I think having enough progesterone over the years also builds metabolic reserve, or helping to protect your brain in the long term. It's generally good for mood as well, although it's sometimes not. So there's a bit of a more nuanced conversation about that, because Yeah, generally progesterone has quite a calming GABA, GABA is a neurotransmitter effect on the brain, but in some women it can have the opposite effect, which is usually because of underlying inflammation. That means they're responding in a weird way to progesterone.
Yeah, and thyroid stuff as well, right? How do we know? So I think that there's a lot of problems with periods. And to me, a problem is something that's there to be solved, and there are a lot of problems that people think are normal. People think that PMS is normal, that period pain is normal, that clotting is normal, that, there's lots of things that people think is normal. But I love the way that you always say they're common.
Yeah, but not normal.
But not normal. What are some of those? What are the meanings of some of those things?
That's a big topic, of course, because that's a huge. That's what I cover in Period Repair Manual, is looking for clues.
Yeah,
trying to figure out what your body's doing and what that could mean. What direct you to what underlying issues you could address. So, just to establish as the baseline again, like the period should come every 21 to 35 days, up to 45 days if you're a teenager. It shouldn't. It shouldn't be painful. I would say no. I would say period pain is not normal in any extent, although there's period pain and then there's period pain. Like severe pain is never, ever, ever normal. Then the flow itself should last anywhere between 2 to 7 days and shouldn't be more than about 80 milliliters, which is about 4 or 5 tablespoons in total over all of the days. So, and there shouldn't be significant premenstrual symptoms either. So if that's the baseline. So then if you have, if your period's not regular, well, then there's different things that can go wrong, right? Like there's no period. That's one option. There's irregular period. There's no ovulation. There's premenstrual symptoms, pain, heaviness. So depending on what the symptom is, then there's going to be different possible reasons for that. So we could try to talk through some of them if you want. We won't be able to cover them all because it's
no, it's a huge topic. And this is something that I do with my clients, is look at these symptoms and look for the feedback from the body. I guess a big one is problems of low progesterone, seeing as we want everyone to ovulate and make sure that they have enough progesterone. I guess one that's a good one is, I find when clients have enough progesterone, they don't get period pain as much and they don't get premenstrual syndrome. Yeah,
to an extent. Yeah, although sometimes a premenstrual syndrome, like I said, can actually occur in the presence of quite a lot of progesterone, which makes it a bit more complicated. But let's say one of the main symptoms of no progesterone, for example, and with an anovulatory cycle, is bleeding that goes on for too long. Like straight away, like if you have a 10-day bleed or a 2-week bleed or even longer, like that means you didn't ovulate pretty much usually. I mean, there could be other, like so many things. There could be other explanations too, but that's usually a pretty good indication that you didn't ovulate. So then, right. So once you know that, then you're like, oh, okay, why didn't I ovulate? And then you can go back and try to correct that issue. Like other symptoms and so you can either have no progesterone, which is like an anovulatory cycle, just nothing, no ovulation at all. Or you can you ovulate and make progesterone, but maybe not for the full 11 to 14 days, or maybe not quite as much as you need, in which case you could get some spotting kind of coming through. That could result in a period that's more painful, that's heavier, for example, although there are other causes of heavy periods. So progesterone is important, as you know, like from my book. I have a section where I talk about, your period is your report card. It's going to be offering you clues about what's happening. So when you're interpreting your clues, which you might need your doctor's help to do, you always coming back to the kind of one of the questions is, okay, well, am I ovulating or not? Because that's fundamental. And then if you're not, then you want to fix that. If you are ovulating but still having symptoms, then you need to look at some of the other issues that could be causing your mood or whatever it is. Typically, actually, with premenstrual, classically, you don't usually get premenstrual symptoms unless you did ovulate. So the true anovulatory cycles are pretty flat. Usually, like women can have mood symptoms, but there won't be a clear cyclic pattern with them. But the most classic premenstrual symptoms are when is riding that progesterone down at the end of the cycle. Like, because progesterone feels so good. So then if it starts to drop away, or especially if it starts to drop away too early, then you start to get withdrawal from it, basically like an anxiety that comes from losing all that nice GABA natural Valium that progesterone is. Yeah.
It's beautiful. I like my progesterone.
Yeah, it's very calming. Yeah.
It's very calming. It's good for me. My body likes progesterone. So I think I always explain to clients like this, that your body needs to feel safe and secure to be able to make babies. Yeah. And when it knows that you can look after yourself, you can feed yourself, you can nourish yourself, it goes, okay, cool, we can do that for a baby. When you're living in a life where you're running from a lion, you're not eating enough food, your body goes, holy shit, what is going on? We're starving, it's too stressful, I'm not going to be able to make babies. And so they don't ovulate. Could we talk about some of the symptoms that put us in this stress response? Or would you just
we can totally talk about that. So no. I think, so what you're describing, the problem of, this is essentially what you're describing as hypothalamic amenorrhea, either no periods from stress or undereating, or longer cycles or shorter luteal phases from stress or undereating. Absolutely. So if that's what I love I use that analogy quite often too, like the body needs to feel safe and nourished. If that's what's going on, like the decision is what I need to do to ovulate regularly is what I need to do is to eat more. That question does depend a little bit on just thinking of the context and what's going on. Like if someone's lost their period or having anovulatory cycles because of PCOS, on the other hand, eating more is not necessarily, depending on what you're eating, is not necessarily going to help the situation at all and could make it worse, right? So it is kind of knowing a little bit where you're starting from. So, but hypothalamic, I might just take a minute. I think what could be really helpful for your listeners is to differentiate between hypothalamic amenorrhea and PCOS, because in some ways they're opposite.
They are.
And in some ways they can look exactly the same.
Oh, I think I've had so many clients who've been diagnosed, and I'm air quoting, with PCOS. Yeah. And when we look at their food logs and stuff, they're seriously under eating, or they're not eating carbohydrate, because there's also a bit of a myth going around that, if you go low carb, that'll help you with your PCOS. And
it depends on what's going on with you. So I'm just trying to formulate my thoughts around this. I'm thinking about doing an Instagram post about kind of starting place, like where, in terms of what is the next step, what do I need to do, what is going to work for me? It does depend on what's going on. This is why this is perfect for your, podcast about what your body's trying to tell you. Like you need to pay attention. You don't want to just blanket statement every woman who's lost her period needs to eat more. Like that would never work, obviously.
No.
So, but in terms of, let's differentiate the two. Let's have the scenario where there's no period. So whether that's your goal is baby or not, your body has stopped having a period. I'll just talk that through. So the first step is to see the doctor, because there could be more obscure reasons for that, right? There could be hyperlectin, there can be thyroid, there can be celiac disease, there can be, a number of things. So hopefully the doctor will rule out some of those less common possibilities. And then at the end of the day, the two most common possibilities are either hypothalamic amenorrhea, which essentially just means undereating, or PCOS, which is short for polycystic ovary syndrome, which has absolutely nothing to do with cysts on the ovaries, like zero to do with cysts on the ovaries, which is unfortunate name. PCOS is often, or not always, often associated with insulin resistance, and actually arguably an overfed state. So you see what we're talking about here. So you could have a woman, you could have someone with no periods, with polycystic ovaries on ultrasound, because that means nothing and can occur with either condition, with, potentially a little bit of acne or something like that. And she could either, depending on, and I'll help you, I'll just describe how you differentiate, but that woman at that point, if that's all is no periods, polycystic ovaries and a bit of acne, she could have either hypothalamic amenorrhea, where she needs to eat way, way more, including more carb, or PCOS, where she arguably needs to eat a bit less and cut sugar, right? Like they're kind of they're opposite in terms of what needs to be done. So a lot of it's context, as you said, like finding out what's actually going on. Like, are you under eating? What are you actually eating, and how long has that been going on? Compared to how much you're exercising. Then I have a few blog posts about this, so people want to go, they can have
I encourage you to sign up for Lara's newsletter. I love it. I just got it this morning. It's always so informative.
Just sent out today. There's a blood test called luteinizing hormone, or LH, which I find incredibly helpful for trying to differentiate between undereating, aka hypothalamic amenorrhea, and PCOS. And so hopefully, that at least gives women kind of a starting place to think about what's really going on. And I'll just say again, please do not read too much into that ultrasound finding of they shouldn't even be doing that. That's not the so-called follicles, like they're not cysts, but the so-called cysts, they're follicles on the ovaries. They're just the eggs. Like, ovaries are full of eggs. So it's normal to see follicles in an ovary, especially if you're young, like younger than 25, you're going to have heaps of follicles. That doesn't necessarily mean anything in terms of your diagnosis. And it's certainly not an explanation for pain or anything like that. On the other hand, you can have something called an ovarian cyst, which is an abnormally large either follicle or something else going on with the ovary, which is abnormal and can be a cause of pain. So I'm trying to get some of some of the naming of things right to help women navigate this.
I think you can have, is this right that, Lara, too, if you come off the pill, it's quite common to have very follicular ovaries and be diagnosed with PCOS after you come off the pill.
It's super common because, the ovaries start pumping out the eggs. Usually androgens go up. So, I've described in my book something called post-pill PCOS, which is a temporary state, which it's important to know that that's temporary if that's what's going on, so that you don't kind of panic and think I've got this disease of my ovaries, which is nothing to do with that. It's just a functional state that you'll probably reverse out of.
Yeah.
That said, some women do have more of a stronger androgen and kind of tendency to androgens and ovulatory cycles, aka PCOS. Like, some women have that from the time they're young through all their life. So, that can happen too. But you can also have women that are just temporarily kind of in a PCOS state and then are given that label and don't really deserve that label and get very confused about what they're supposed to be doing, especially if they're already under eating and then told PCOS they might just eat less. And as you say, restrict carbohydrates when they don't need to. And then if that's what's happening, they will essentially never get the period. Like, they'll be at that point walking 180 degrees in the wrong direction from what they need to do to get a period, which is very sad. It's
really sad. I feel like this is a really common diagnosis for clients that come through and work with me, is that they get told after coming off the pill they have PCOS, can't get pregnant, or on low carb diets, but they're really thin anyway.
Absolutely.
Like, really thin, and they're training very hard, and and then they end up doing IVF and all this sort of stuff. And when someone really sitting down and doing the investigating of the cycle and, looking at it in context, this is why I don't work with anyone who won't do a food diary for me, because you can't, the context. And I think as well, what women say they eat and what they actually eat can be very different when they sit down and actually write it down. Like, I tend to work with a lot of women who forget to eat, or they're too busy to eat, or, and that's a problem. Can we talk about how much food is needed to make hormones, Lara?
Well, you need your base, at least. It depends on how much activity you're doing, right? Yeah. But so depending for an average, it depends on your body size as well. But let's say for an average frame, you need, I'll just speak in calories, but like, you'll need probably at a minimum 2,200 calories just to kind of keep your body going. The thing is, though, if you're recovering from and then more on top of that if you're active. But if you're recovering from hypothalamic amenorrhea, if you've had 6 to 12 months of under eating under your belt, that's already happened, and your brain has shut down ovulation because of that, you need more than you would normally just for baseline. So to recover from hypothalamic amenorrhea, you probably need the number I've seen is 2,500 calories per day. Minimum, more if you're active, including, I would say, if you're in that state of undereating, I would say minimum 200 grams of carbohydrate, starchy carbohydrate as well, over months and months to get your period back. It's not going to happen instantly because of what I described in period to perimenopause is the 100 days to ovulation. So it takes 100 days for the communication between the brain and the ovaries to get the eggs, the follicles going, get them making hormones, finally reach ovulation. That it's 3 or 4 months. So it's about playing the long game especially for that problem of lack of periods. Other period symptoms respond a lot quicker than that, but regularity or periods, irregular ovulation takes time. It takes time both ways. It takes time to regain a period. It takes time to lose a period as well. So you could be doing a low carb diet for a few months and feel great, and then suddenly, boom! It's like, 4 months in, it's like, now my period's gone.
And this is really key work too, because when you do a diet like that, drop calories or you cut out major food groups, you have like this adrenaline surge and you think you feel amazing, but it's adrenaline and cortisol.
It can be, I think some of it gets a little more complicated too, because I think what happens sometimes is when you're cutting foods, whatever the narrative is, the dietary plan that you're doing, like you could also be getting benefits from cutting, for example, like
processed foods,
wheat or dairy are two things that are actually quite inflammatory for the gut for some people. So then they're like, oh my God, I feel amazing. So I'll give the example of my interpretation of a vegan diet. Now, I don't know how you feel. I know what I'm, how your listeners feel about vegan, or I got in trouble the other day from a patient for being rude about a vegan diet. So
I think most of my listeners are not vegans.
Okay. All right. So this is what happens. So here's an example of what happens. Sometimes, you can go vegan, or a person goes vegan and feels amazing for a few months. And some of it could be the adrenaline, but I think more of it in the case of vegan diets specifically is you're coming off dairy, which for some women really improves premenstrual symptoms, pain, like period pain. It can actually quite dramatically improve symptoms coming off cow's dairy. But coming off the meat and the other, animal proteins was sort of incidental. Like that wasn't part of the improvement, but it's kind of all done at once. So then they think, I feel amazing. And then like 6 months, 12 months in, the nutrient deficiencies start to really kick in. Like there's I would argue, some pretty hardcore, pretty troubling nutrient deficiencies from a vegan diet that take a while to start to really show up. So you get that honeymoon period where you feel amazing, and then trouble starts to brew. And, likewise, with a very different example, going on a low carb diet, you might, as part of a low carb, you're doing low carb, but also you're cutting FODMAPs and wheat and kind of bloaty things for digestion that, so at first you feel amazing because your digestive problems have improved so much and you're fine, like your periods are fine. But then, over 4 or 5 months, you're actually on a low carb diet. Most women will tend to undereat because protein is so satiating. So then you kind of move into the undereating and then lose your period, then develop hypothalamic amenorrhea.
It's so important to have that context of that woman and her case history and her life and all the diets that she's tried, age, everything.
Whether she has insulin resistance or not, that's huge. That's a make or break question. Like if any of your listeners are just not sure what's going on, but told maybe they have PCOS, maybe not, like just trying to figure it out, ask your doctor, like ask the question, do I have insulin resistance? Like, was I tested for that? Is that what's going on or not? And then a lot of the dietary decisions kind of hinge on that, I would argue.
Yeah. And also I think a big factor is low thyroid.
Yeah.
And I'm working with a huge amount of people who actually have subclinical low thyroid. So they're showing up with really low temperatures. Okay with a blood test, like their thyroid panel is okay, but they have really low temperatures and some other blood markers, and then they're putting on weight, and then what they're trying to do is eat less and less to try and get rid of the weight, and then which pushes them further into this stressful symptom. But when we don't have enough thyroid hormone, it really affects our cycle. What are some of the signs that you would look for in a cycle for low thyroid? Because it doesn't always show up on blood tests.
No. Okay, and I was just saying, in terms of blood tests, for what it's worth, I'd say the single most important blood test to have for thyroid is called thyroid antibodies.
Yeah, which you don't do in Australia unless you have something different with your TSH.
But you can order it yourself.
Yeah,
so it costs $45. So just say to the doctor, I'll pay privately, or say to the lab, I just want to order that.
Yeah, and I think this is so important, Lara, because I have perfectly normal TSH, but I have terrible. I've had Hashimoto since I was 25, and and it depends on stress. Sometimes my antibodies will be fine, sometimes they'll be off the Richter, and so I know I'm quite forthright to go into a doctor and go, I want my antibodies tested and I will pay for them. So I'm glad that you said that. Yeah.
Just pay for it. It's not a big deal. I mean, their only restriction is they can't bulk bill it to Medicare, but just pay the $45. So so in terms of how does Hashimoto specifically, affect periods? Yeah, lots of ways. It can, and some of the effect is from the inflammation, right? The autoimmune inflammation, not just from the lack of T3 thyroid hormone. Part of it's that, but some of it's just the inflammatory process itself associated with Hashimoto's. So in which case, actually, looping back to diet, those are the women who feel better off gluten.
Yeah, so definitely. I would say like grains,
Yeah, but just to put it in context, women who don't have Hashimoto's probably don't need to be off gluten, right? So it's not like coming off gluten is a blanket.
No, it has to be very specific. Yeah.
So Hashimoto's typically, it can look different ways, but it can make periods less regular. It interferes with ovulation. So you can start to get no ovulation or irregular ovulation, or a less robust ovulation, so less like a shorter luteal phase. You can get heavier periods, in part because of the lack of progesterone. And actually just that underactive thyroid makes periods heavier, just directly by affecting coagulation factors. So it's and also interferes with estrogen clearance. And the periods can definitely tell the story of Hashimoto's. And when Hashimoto's really becomes a problem, just to give some of your listeners a little sneak peek into the future, is perimenopause. Mm-hmm. So in fact, I've made this image. I'm going to share it again soon on social media of the three, kind of a Venn diagram of the three things of perimenopause, so which is in your 40s, Hashimoto's, and insulin resistance. Like those three things together create a perfect storm of, period problems, fatigue, hair loss, weight gain.
And I think they're really underdiagnosed, what's the word I want to say? They're under-considered when women don't have, unless they're working with someone like you or me who knows about these things, they really can be under-considered, I think, with normal general practice.
Insulin resistance is not given the attention it should be, considering how much it affects women, and thyroid as well. I would argue Hashimoto's is probably underdiagnosed. Yeah.
And I would say too, blood sugar handling issues. So they're having the low blood sugars, the high blood sugars, like an inconsistent blood sugar throughout the day can really affect this profile as well. And it's really learning what your body needs in terms of food frequency. And I would say, especially like all my women that get up and train at 6 a.m, like you can't wait till 9 o'clock.
Oh, no.
Go. It's got to eat. And so I just wanted to put that caveat in there. I know Lara agrees with this, because I know all these women go, cool, I don't eat till 9 and 10 o'clock. But if you're getting up at 5:30 and going to the gym or going for a run, and then you run around like crazy trying to get your kids to school and rushing at 9 o'clock, is too late to eat.
Agreed. If there's training involved, then there's eating with training. Well, because I met you at a whole seminar that we did, a full day seminar that we did about sports training for women. So certainly if there's training involved, there's going to be some eating around that. Yeah. So that's different. And also if you're already in a state of under eating, then you just want to eat as much as you can.
So there's always context before you go Googling what's wrong with me. There's always context. That's why it's really important to work with a practitioner who looks at all these things. Can we talk about moving into menopause? Like you said, progesterone is so important for menopause.
Well,
having a bank of progesterone.
Yeah, well, having banks, I mean, not that it stays in the body. I mean, just to be clear, like progesterone has a half-life of 12 hours. Like, we only make it 2 weeks of the month of the cycle. Then it's gone. We can't make any progesterone with menopause. Like, no, pretty much zero. Totally. Like the nervous system makes a little bit of its own progesterone. But in general, the progesterone that we had in our 30s, 20s and 30s and early 40s will be gone forever. So it's important to have had those years of doing it, making progesterone. And then for the symptoms that start to arise with perimenopause in particular, and menopause to some extent, menopause is different, right? Menopause, if there are going to be symptoms, it's during that transition phase, which is perimenopause, which is, anywhere between 2 to 10 years before the final period, and maybe up to 1 or 2 years after the final period. That's the time of symptoms. And then menopause is 3 decades of pretty stable state, kind of a different situation. But during the transition time, it can be helpful to take progesterone, I guess, for what it's worth. That's my position, that it can, during those years, especially if there's heavy periods because of anovulatory cycles of perimenopause, taking progesterone can be quite helpful for sleep, for mood, for thyroid. Actually, the thyroid loves progesterone in a few ways. So that's better than taking the pill, for example, because this is important. There's no progesterone in any type of hormonal birth control, either pill or injection or implant or IUD. Not that I'm totally against. I actually feel like the hormonal IUD has some things going for it, but it's not progesterone. So it's a drug called levonorgestrel. So everything we're talking about now in terms of progesterone is either progesterone you make by ovulating, or with pregnancy, you make huge amounts of progesterone then, or you take it in the form of either progesterone cream or a capsule, which in Australia is called perimetrium. In New Zealand is called something else. Do you have New Zealand listeners? You probably do.
Yeah, we actually have a global audience.
Okay, so depending on what country you're in, perimetrium or Utrogestin, there's a few other names that progesterone goes by.
I really like the Progest E as well. That you can get.
That's quite a low dose one, but there's a little bit of real progesterone in that.
I found that one really helpful because it can be topical. So it's also about bone mineral density, right? Can we talk a bit about bone mineral density?
Yeah, so both estrogen and progesterone help to build bone. Estrogen works more to slow the breakdown of bone, and estrogen helps with the quality of the connective tissue, the collagen, particularly in bone. Progesterone actually stimulates bone building, the osteoblasts, the bone building cells. So this is why, it's one of the reasons it's so important to ovulate. It's also why all types of hormonal birth control are associated with some degree of bone impairment, either failing to kind of reach what's called peak bone density in our mid-20s to 30, or some types of hormonal birth control actually cause bone loss, temporary bone loss that can hopefully be reversed once you come off it. So I would argue it's probably because of the lack of the way hormonal birth control switches off ovulation, therefore deprives the body of progesterone. Is affecting bone. So some of the research around progesterone and bone comes from my colleague, Professor Geraldine Pryor, who's a reproductive endocrinologist who helped me with Period Repair Manual and has quite a few protocols out there. She's a researcher, she's a scientist, so she's done quite a few studies about progesterone itself and how that's beneficial for different things, including bone.
Something that came out in your newsletter this morning, which I really wanted to talk about, and I loved how you switched the term estrogen dominance to... Yeah. Let's talk about that, because everyone's going on about estrogen dominance, and then I feel like I'm so on board with you on this because I feel like that gives people the wrong picture in their mind.
I don't use the term, so I find the term estrogen dominance just not helpful at all. Like, it tends to imply, I guess, high levels of estrogen, which is sometimes the case, but sometimes not, and also there's a few things going on. So in the newsletter this morning, the main point I'm making is usually what people mean when they say estrogen dominance is a cycle where there was no ovulation and no progesterone, which is properly called and an ovulatory cycle. So I feel like the term an ovulatory, not ovulation cycle is a term that people can use. Like, I don't think it's too complicated. Like, I think even, your average woman can understand that term and then speak to her doctor about it. It's like, okay, is the problem that I'm having an ovulatory cycle? So, and then the doctor can respond to that. So the anovulatory cycles get called, as I put in my newsletter, like estrogen dominance is one of the word terms that gets used for that, but also dysfunctional uterine bleeding, hormone imbalance really usually refers to an anovulatory cycle, unopposed estrogen, breakthrough bleeding. Anovulatory cycles can lead to what's called endometrial hyperplasia, or thickening of the uterine lining, or polyps. This is all from no progesterone. So it makes sense, right? It's just it's a more useful way to speak about it. And then another aspect, I'll just tag on to that, kind of a separate issue, but I hear the word estrogen dominance being used to refer to symptoms that occur during times of the cycle when there's high estrogen. Now, it's normal for there to be times in the cycle when there's high estrogen. It's a hormone that goes up and down quite dramatically. That's normal. If you're getting headaches or hives or anxiety or like irritability when estrogen is high, that is usually a histamine issue, response from the estrogen. So then, once again, I'm like, I don't think that the term estrogen dominance is very helpful there. Like, really, you're getting symptoms when your estrogen goes up. So it's probably a mast cell or histamine issue, or there could be other things. Iodine deficiency can cause that too. So it's about helping your body, giving your body what it needs so it can ride those ups and downs of estrogen and progesterone that is normal for it.
And I think what's helpful for people to know is that so much of this can be done with diet and lifestyle changes.
Yeah, for sure, especially the histamine side of things. So not the pill, please, people. No, don't take the pill. The other question I wanted to ask you, and this is going to lead into you to telling us about your new book, which is coming out, perimenopause symptoms. I found women having perimenopause symptoms in their 40s. But actually, when we look at their diet and then look at their lifestyle, and, I find it can be quite common too when women go back into the workforce in this age, and there's a whole new range of stress and less eating, but there's a lot of hot flushing. Right, flushing.
And sometimes it's actually thyroid related, or, and so using diet, we can clear that up. Or let's talk about what is true perimenopause. And what can we do about it? Because like you said, we're never too old pre-menopause, where we can still do something about fixing our cycles,
right?
Getting some progesterone, like.
So, the term, it's funny because a lot of people don't even know they kind of confuse perimenopause with menopause, and they're actually totally different things. So perimenopause is the years when you're still cycling, the years leading up to your final period. So normally, in a normal situation, that's probably not going to be till your mid-40s, I would say. Like, it can happen by age 40. It's less common. And as you point out, there could be other things going on. And we could talk about hot flushes specifically in a minute. So there's symptoms that could start to come on, usually heavy periods, sleep changes, mood changes, sometimes hot flushes that happen just before the period. That's pretty common during perimenopause. And that can go on for quite a few years until you finally get your final period. And then a year after your final period, you achieve menopause, you kind of qualify for menopause. And then things usually get pretty chill and stable after that. After it's all kind of the change is over, then I call it second childhood. Like, you move into this, it's a much more stable sort of place. So a lot of women need to know that symptoms of perimenopause are always temporary. In terms of, if you have an average 40-year-old woman and she's having hot flushes and, let's say, weight gain, the question is, what is the cause of those symptoms? I think you're right. I think the first thing is to check thyroid. And I have a patient story in Period to Perimenopause about that, actually, where she thought, I think I have a couple patient stories where they're like, oh my God, is this menopause? And it's actually, no, it's thyroid. So, yes. So definitely checking thyroid is the first tier of figuring out what's going on, including thyroid antibodies. But then if it's not thyroid, the thing is, stress always plays a role in hot flushes. Hot flushes are from the brain. They are caused by adrenaline, basically. So they're always going to play a role. It's just that with the changes in our female hormones, the brain it kind of loses its set point in terms of temperature regulation. So it's more likely to flush especially if there's stress. So even a young woman with perfect hormones, everything going fine, can have hot flushes from stress, right? But then into perimenopause, it becomes that threshold, it becomes easier to cross that, if that makes sense. So it's, put it this way, if you're early 40s and you're having hot flushes before your period, don't panic. It doesn't mean menopause is anytime imminent or anything like that. It's, first thing to do would be, follow my rescue prescription for perimenopause. It's just like magnesium, calming down, as you say, stabilizing your blood sugar, seeing if that resolves the hot flushes, which it usually does. And then, but if they're becoming more severe or more frequent, then maybe you are moving into those perimenopause, which is a few years leading up to the final period. Now, it can happen. It's worth mentioning about 1 in 100. So it's not common, but occasionally you can have very young women, even in their in their 30s or even in their 20s or younger, even unfortunately, who get early menopause. That's something different. So if you suddenly lose your period and you start having strong hot flushes, chances are it's thyroid or something else, but the doctor does need to rule out early menopause. And that's easily done with a blood test called FSH. So it can happen, and it's devastating when it does happen, but it's not the most common reason for hot flushes when you're still 30-something.
I think it's real. There's a lot of people come to me, they're freaking out. I'm like, it's okay. It's not.
Well, I've had patients actually, and flushing before the period, I've had young women that's happening like pretty much all their life. Like it's just, it's a stressful time, that premenstrual time. So a few hot flushes before the period doesn't necessarily mean that menopause is imminent. Although that symptom does become more common in perimenopause. So
yeah. It's about looking at the context, looking at your training. We're going to have Kira Sutherland on next week, and we'll talk more about training with your cycle, because that can affect that too. I found when I changed my training program to be really heavy in the first 2 weeks of the cycle, and then have a really low intensity training in the second 2 weeks, that for me fixed my flushing before having a period. Yeah. So, and you get the most strength gains as well when you train hard in that first 2 weeks. I think it's like, I just read a study that Tracy Sims just said it was like a 32% increase in strength for the women who trained just that first 2 weeks of the month, compared to the women training the whole month. They only had a 5% increase in strength. So it's really interesting using your hormones, using your cycle for all these goals. So I guess I know your new book's coming out. You have your amazing book already, Period Repair Manual. I really want to, I have to have you back, because so many people ask me about menopause. I'm so glad you've written a book about menopause. I'm really angry that menopause, that people who have postmenopause are just called postmenopausal women. Like, someone said, what do I call them? Like, unfortunately, that's the term. I really want to change the narrative around menopause. It's like, because so many people look at menopause as not sexy, postmenopause not sexy. But, I really hope that if women can educate themselves on their fertile years, that menopause can be a little bit easier, and postmenopause can be, it's a new stage of life.
Well, I can share with you. I mean, I've just written a whole book on this, so you'll see. I have a book on the emotional transition. I'm in menopause. I haven't quite reached that 12 months with no period, so I don't think I'm officially there. This is actually still perimenopause, when you're waiting for your, waiting 6 months, no period, wondering if that was your last one or not. It is, it's very, very different than what I expected. I don't quite know because I know we only sort of have a few minutes left, but it's different than I expected. Like, I think in our society, young women are unfortunately kind of, at least I was sort of taught to dread it. Like, this horrible thing. But actually you get here and it's a little bit like, at least been my experience, kind of a little bit like kind of being in on, it's like, now you're sort of in the in-group, like now, like there's kind of like a party going on here. Like, not to say there, because there can be symptoms which can make it distressing, but it's also, there's this real sense of, I just don't give up. anymore. Like, you know, just really, it feels different than being a young woman at all the people pleasing things that young women have to do. Like, you just kind of finally feel like you can say what you think, which is, so in terms of, I'm fine with the phrase menopausal. You're just a woman. Now you're just, it's 3 or 4 decades. So it's not like it's a small time of your life. Most of us will spend at least a third, if not more, of our lives in menopause. I mean, it's rather, I prefer just in menopause rather than post-menopause. It's like, in the low hormone state of menopause, which is fine.
I like that. That. And I think it's really good to know, like, I've got some clients who are in their 60s and 70s. We didn't really talk about libido today, but they still have very healthy and active libidos in menopause. And they're actually some of the sexiest women I know. They're just like you say, stop giving an F about stuff, and they're just enjoying their life and enjoying their sex life. And, I think that I really want to change the narrative for women around this. It's not a downer.
Yeah.
It's a transition.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good transition in a way.
Well, it is what it is. I mean, it's, you'll see in my book when it comes out, you can have me back next year, early next year, to talk about it. But like, there's evolutionary reasons for menopause. Once I kind of got my head around probably how important it was for, in many ways, ancient humans for menopause to evolve, because basically at the end of the day, it's because menopausal women, like women 50 something, 60 something, even 70 something, even in traditional forager societies, get a lot of stuff done, right? Like they've got a huge skill set. They've acquired over 50 more years. They just know how to do stuff, and they get stuff done, and they look after all the other people, all the useless, teenagers. Even if you're not particularly personally looking after a teenager, which I'm not, but like, you're still kind of playing that role in society, just helping people, like getting stuff done.
Yeah. Oh, this is why so many women in their 50s like start a new business and have like an amazing career leap, and just so much to look forward to. Love that you're honouring the different stages. So please, Lara, can you tell us where to get your book, have a look at your website, sign up for Lara's newsletter. I love it. I don't sign up for a lot of newsletters because they're just rubbish, but I love Lara's.
The good thing about my newsletter, I had one reader write back and say, "Oh, thank you for your newsletter. And one of the best things is that it doesn't come too often. So it's only every 1 or 2 weeks with a little like selection of little tidbits to, because you might be interested in, with some of the things might be interesting, but some things aren't. So you can, usually with a newsletter, I'd like to think there's something, at least one thing for everybody that's interesting. So I'm easy to find. My blog is Lara Briden. All my social media, including Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter, is at Lara Briden. And my book is Period to Perimenopause, and my new book is coming out early next year. So I'd love to. And I'm going to be, it's funny you mentioned Kira, because Kira Sutherland's a good friend of mine. So she and I are going to, I hope, be doing a menopause event, perimenopause event in Sydney around the time of my book launch. So you could come and interview us.
Well, I would love that. That would be awesome. I know. Well, I think, this is I know that Kira has on your website as well. Do you guys have some more advanced kind of trainings and seminars for practitioners and personal trainers and stuff like that, right?
So we did a couple, 2 years in a row. We did a full day kind of training with your cycle to the women's hormones presentation. So I think she's put the audio of one of those up, and we've collaborated on a few things over the last little while. So absolutely. Yeah. Because I'm not from Sydney. Obviously I'm Canadian, but I
we used to practice in Sydney.
Right? I lived there for 15 years.
Oh, okay.
I know Sydney very well. And normally I had been, until 2020, been coming back and forth between Christchurch and Sydney to see patients. And of course,
that's no longer.
That's not happening this year, no.
So I can't recommend her book highly enough, especially if you have teenage girls, to give it them to read. I would just love for teenage girls to embrace their cycles from the get-go, and then we wouldn't have so many like me who had post-birth control syndrome and all that sort of stuff. And it's pretty much every one of my clients, I have a few copies and I lend them out to my clients. If they go, I'm not going to borrow, I'm going, well, yeah, take this. Read it. Just one of the simple things. The best thing you can do as a woman, I think, is learn about your body using your cycle. I was just going to
say the phrase body literacy, which is just a nice way to think about it. Like, just knowing how your body works opens the door to a lot of understanding of a lot of different things, actually. So not just, we talked about training, mood, just understanding the strengths of your hormones rather than thinking of your period as some kind of always just problem to be fixed. But
And I really hope there's a few men listening to this, male trainers especially, who can get an insight into how to work with their clients and help them through the 3 different stages. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show, Lara.
Thanks for having me, Layla.
I'm Layla Lutz, and you've been listening to The Body Never Lies. If you haven't yet, please go to your favourite podcast app and subscribe, rate and review this podcast. All the resources and references from this episode are waiting for you on my website, leelalutz.com. Just click on podcast and look for this episode. Now join me next week for another episode of The Body Never Lies. Thank you so much for listening.